Staten Island, New York, the winter of 1869. In a rented room a few blocks from the harbor, an old man sits alone, near blind in one eye, waiting for a war that is never going to come. Almost none of his neighbors know who he is. He's a Mexican general who once ruled a whole country. He crushed the defenders at the Alamo, lost half of Mexico to the United States, then grabbed power and lost it again so many times that even his own people stopped keeping track. Now he's broke and exiled, down to one last scheme to buy his way back to glory. The scheme is sitting in his luggage. A ton of dried tree sap hauled all the way up from the jungles of southern Mexico. He's staked everything on it. He's sure it's going to make him a fortune. He's wrong, badly wrong, and also in a way he'll never live long enough to understand, completely right. Because the sap is useless for what he wants it for. But folded up inside, it is a habit that 4 billion people will one day share. It rides into 2 world wars. It builds one of the great American fortunes. It strips a rainforest bare, and it ends up welded to the pavement of nearly every city on Earth. It's in a pack at your local shop right now for less than $1. The Aztecs had a word for that sap, chicle. You know it as gum. And almost everything you assume about the thing in your mouth is wrong, starting with what it's actually made of. That last question didn't get properly answered until a lab dug into it in 2025. So how did a lump of sacred jungle sap turn into the most chewed and most littered substance on the planet? And why did the people selling it work so hard to make sure you never once asked what was in it? Forget the history for a second. The answer starts with your own jaw. You are built to chew. Your jaw carries some of the strongest muscles in your body for their size. Your mouth floods with saliva the second you start, and that saliva scrubs your teeth and wakes your digestion up before a single bite goes down. Your nervous system treats the steady rhythm of it as a signal to calm down, which is why stressed people chew pen lids in meetings and grind their teeth half the night. The urge to chew on something that isn't food isn't a modern thing. It's old and it's physical. And while we're here, let's kill the myth your parents told you. Swallow a piece of gum and it does not sit in your stomach for 7 years. Your body can't break the base down, sure, but it just pushes it through and it's gone in a day or two. That part's harmless. The part that isn't harmless is what the base is made of now. And we'll get back to that because it's the whole reason this story matters. Long before anyone sold a single stick, people everywhere were already chewing things that gave them nothing to eat. The oldest proof we've got is 5,700 years old, and it still has a dead woman's DNA in it. In a bog in southern Denmark, archaeologists pulled a small black lump of birch tar out of the mud. Someone had chewed it soft, bitten down hard enough to leave tooth marks, and spat it out, and there it sat for nearly 6,000 years. In 2019, scientists managed to recover a complete human genome from that ancient bit of spit. It came from a woman. They nicknamed her Lola. She had dark skin, blue eyes, couldn't stomach milk, and her last meal had been duck and hazelnuts. They even found the virus that causes glandular fever still hanging around in her mouth. A chewed scrap of gum handed us the face of a person who died before the first pyramid was ever cut. Sit with that one for a second. She wasn't unusual. All over the ancient world, people chewed whatever their local trees gave up. The Greeks chewed mastic, a resin from a squat little tree on the island of Chios. to clean their teeth and freshen their breath. Up in the northern forests, people chewed spruce sap. Anywhere humans lived near the right tree, they'd found the same trick sooner or later. But the chew that would end up swallowing the whole world came from one tree, in one place. And the people who tapped it first didn't treat it as a treat. They treated it as something you did not mess around with. In the forest of what's now Mexico and Guatemala grows the sapodilla. Cut its bark, and a white latex bleeds out and hardens in the air. The Maya boiled it down, dried it, and chewed it to hold off thirst and hunger on long marches. They called it cha. The Aztecs took it further and named it chicle, the word that still hides inside chicle and inside the chiclets on the shop shelf today. To them, chewing was anything but casual. It came loaded with rules so strict that the Spanish, when they arrived, wrote them down half scandalized. Out in public, who got to chew was basically a question of honor. Unmarried girls and small kids could chew wherever they liked. Grown women were meant to do it only in private, to freshen the breath, never out where people could see. A married woman chewing it in the street got read as a woman selling her body. And a man who chewed in public, he was laughed at. Soft, unmanly, a bit of a joke. Let that gap sink in for a moment. The thing you now chew without a single thought on a crowded bus once carried enough shame to wreck the reputation of anyone who used it wrong. For hundreds of years, all of this stayed locked up inside Mesoamerica. It took an accident to drag it north. And here's the odd part. The first person ever to sell chewing gum in America never touched chicle at all. Maine, 1848. A young man named John Curtis had watched people chew lumps of spruce resin, the sticky stuff that weeps out of spruce bark, a habit he'd picked up about from Native Americans. Curtis tried something nobody had really bothered with. He boiled the resin down on the family stove, skimmed it, cut it into strips, wrapped them up, and sold them. He called it State of Maine Pure Spruce Gum, and it was the first branded chewing gum anyone had ever put on sale. It tasted rough, and it cracked apart the moment it got cold, but people bought it anyway. Curtis built a factory, took on more than 200 workers, and was soon turning out thousands of sticks a day. For the first time, chewing wasn't something you scraped off a tree yourself. It was a thing on a shelf with a name on it. Spruce gum hit a ceiling fast though. Too harsh, too brittle. Always crying out for something better. And something better was already in the country. It was sitting in a New York warehouse. A ton of Aztec sap, owned by a bankrupt general who was dead certain he was holding the future of rubber. This is the moment the old general has been waiting for, whether he knows it yet or not. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna needed cash, and he was convinced his chicle was the way to get it. Rubber was the wonder material of the age. If he could turn cheap sap into cheap rubber, he'd fund an army and march back into Mexico a hero. So he dumped the whole problem and the sap onto an American inventor named Thomas Adams. Adams went at it for months. He boiled it, he pressed it, he mixed in everything he could think of, trying to force chicle to act like rubber. It just wouldn't. Every single attempt flopped, and eventually Santa Anna lost patience and sailed home, where he died broke a few years later without ever hearing how any of it turned out. Adams was stuck with a pile of useless sap and an empty wallet. Then something small started nagging at him. He'd watch the old general break off little pieces of the chicle and chew on them the way he had back home. So on a hunch, Adams softened a batch, rolled it into balls, and talked a local drugstore into keeping a few by the till. They sold out, and the customers came straight back for more. That was it for the rubber. Adams chased the gum instead. By 1871, he had Adams New York gum on the market. He added licorice and called it blackjack. Later, he coated little pellets in a candy shell and called them chiclets, straight off that ancient Aztec word. A failed rubber experiment had turned into a fortune, and the man whose sap kicked it all off had already sailed away to die with nothing. But Adams wasn't the one who jammed gum into every pocket on Earth. That took a soap salesman with one genuinely bizarre idea. It also took a supply chain with a body count. Hold on to that phrase, a body count, because every stick that made William Wrigley rich was quietly bleeding a forest 2,000 miles to the south, and we'll get to the men dying in it. First, the salesman. Wrigley didn't set out to sell gum at all. He sold soap, then baking powder, and to move more of it, he started throwing a couple of sticks of free gum into every order. Then he noticed the thing that would rewire his entire life. His customers didn't care about the soap. They wanted the free gum. So in 1891, he flipped the whole business over and bet everything on the giveaway. His real gift was never the gum. It was the marketing, and he spent on it like a man who'd lost his mind. In 1915, he posted free sticks of gum to every single name in the American phone books, roughly 1.5 million people. A few years on, he did it again, this time to 7 million. Juicy Fruit and Spearmint became household names. Wrigley turned into one of the richest men in the country, rich enough to buy a baseball team and a whole island off the California coast, all of it built on gum. Then, in 1928, a bored accountant accidentally reshaped childhood. Walter Deemer wasn't even a chemist. He was messing about with gum recipes on the side when one batch came out stretchier and less sticky than anything before it. Springy enough to actually blow into a bubble, the only food dye on the shelf that afternoon happened to be pink. That one accident is the reason bubble gum is still pink almost 100 years later. Fleer named it Double Bubble and sold $1.5 million of the stuff in year one, right in the teeth of the Great Depression. Then the wars did the thing no ad campaign ever could. Gum went into the ration kit of every American soldier. And all through the Second World War, Wrigley shipped nearly his whole supply straight to the military. G is handed sticks of it to hungry kids in France and the Pacific, across North Africa. For a lot of people, the first taste they ever got of America was a stick of Wrigley's. Gum stopped being American and started belonging to everyone. From the outside, it all looked like a clean little pleasure that hurt nobody. It wasn't. Now, the forest and the men who bled it dry. Every stick of that early gum started life as real chicle. And real chicle had to be cut out of the jungle by hand, one tree at a time. The men who did it were called Chicleros, and their work was about as brutal as anything in the Americas. Picture one of them. It's the rainy season because that's the only time the sap runs properly. So he's out there in warm, soaking rain and knee-deep mud with the mosquitoes coming up off it in clouds. He's got a rope and a machete. He throws the rope around a sapodilla trunk and walks himself up it 30 feet, maybe 40, then leans out into open air and slashes long zigzag cuts into the bark so the white latex runs down into a bag on his hip. One wet handhold is all it takes, one bad step, and a fallout here, days from the nearest town, usually just means a body nobody ever comes to collect. The trees healed slowly and couldn't be cut again for years, so the companies kept pushing the men deeper and deeper into country where no one would ever find them. The worst part was waiting back at camp. Most Chicleros were buried in debt to the very men who supplied them, finishing each season owing more than they'd earned and getting sent back into the trees the next year to chase a balance they were never actually allowed to clear. The whole thing was rigged so they could never get out. So while Wrigley was buying his island, men were dying in the mud to keep the machine fed. It was never going to last. By the 1930s, the forests were being tapped faster than they could ever recover, and the supply started to fall apart. The industry had hit a wall. What it wanted was gum with no tree, no chicleros, no jungle in the picture at all. And it found a way to get exactly that. That way is the reason the gum you chew is going to outlive you. This is the part that got quietly scrubbed out of the story. Somewhere around the middle of the last century, the gum companies walked away from chicle for good and switched to a base they could just cook up in a factory out of petroleum. The sap of a living tree got traded for synthetic rubber and plastic. Polyisobutylene, styrene, butadiene, polyethylene, polyvinyl acetate. If those words mean nothing to you, you already know the stuff by its other jobs. It's in car tires, it's in plastic bags, and wood glue, and the lining of a tin can. By 1980, the United States had basically stopped buying Mexican chicle. The sacred sap the Aztecs once guarded with rules of honor was gone from your gum, and hardly anyone even noticed the swap because the label never had to admit to it. Even now, a pack can print gum base as a single word and tell you absolutely nothing else. So here's the blunt version. If you've only ever bought your gum from a shop, you have never once chewed real chewing gum in your life. You've been chewing a soft, sweetened cousin of a car tire. The chewing your body's been doing for 5,000 years never changed. What you put in your mouth to do it turned into plastic. And plastic doesn't go anywhere when you're done with it. Look down at any old pavement in any big city. Those hundreds of flat gray-black coins pressed into the concrete aren't stains. That's gum. After cigarette butts, dropped gum is the most common litter on the streets of the world. And because it's basically plastic, it doesn't rot. It just sits there for decades. Britain alone spends something like 7 million pounds a year scraping the stuff off the ground. Some places gave up on cleaning it and just banned it. In 1992, Singapore made it illegal to sell or import chewing gum, full stop, after wads of it kept jamming the door sensors on the city's trains and messing up a place that prided itself on being spotless. For 12 years, you literally could not buy a stick of gum in the country. Even now, you can only get it from a pharmacist for a medical reason, and only because a trade deal with the United States finally forced a crack in the rule. Then in 2025, the story turned inward. Up to that point, all the damage had been out there, on the street, in the forest, sitting in a bin somewhere. A study out of UCLA asked a colder question. What does gum leave inside you while you're chewing it? The answer was Thousands of microplastic particles shed straight into your saliva from one piece, most of them in the first few minutes. Chew every day, and you're swallowing tens of thousands of little scraps of plastic a year. And the natural gums, the ones sold as the clean, healthy choice, they shed them too. The gum you chew to feel fresh and clean is quietly leaving plastic in your body and on the street, and almost nobody has ever once stopped to think about it. Remember Lola? One small piece of chewed gum kept her alive for us to find, 5,700 years after she spat it into that bog. Her face, her last meal, the bug she was carrying in her mouth, all of it, held inside a lump of birch tar. Now think about the piece you spat out this week. The gum that ancient woman left behind eventually broke down and became part of the earth again. Yours won't. What you dropped this week is a harder, more permanent record of you than hers ever was of her. Thousands of years from now, it could still be lying right where it landed, still holding some faint trace of you, long after everything else about you is gone. That's the strange trade we made without ever really noticing. We took the one thing people have chewed since before the pyramids, a living sap pulled from a tree and guarded like it was holy, and swapped it for something that acts as if the tree never existed. The jaw never changed. Neither did the itch to chew on something. The only thing that changed was what we fed it. From something that came up out of the ground and went back into it, to something that comes up out of the ground and never leaves. So next time you peel open a stick or scrape a hard gray coin of it off the underside of a chair, take 1 second to actually look at what you're holding. The Maya thought it was sacred. A ruined dictator bet his last dream on it. It outlasted 2 world wars, and it outlived the forest that first made it. And unlike almost anything else you'll ever put in your mouth, it won't dissolve and it won't rot. And long after you've forgotten it ever touched your tongue, it'll still be out there somewhere, pressed into a pavement or turning over in the sea as a fleck of plastic too small to see. If this one got its hooks in you, subscribe and tell me in the comments which turn in Gum's story caught you off guard the most. There's plenty more where this came from, so stick around.